My dog led the way inside. 2. We reached the border between the worlds, and I felt the disorientation I remembered from my other trips. I staggered a little, and the baby light went out, even though there was no draft. I told Radar to wait, and took another match from one of the empty bullet loops in Mr. Bowditch's concho belt. I struck a light on rough stone and relit the candle. The giant bats fluttered and cheeped overhead, then settled. We went on. When we came to the well with its spiral encirclement of narrow steps, I shielded the candle and looked up, hoping I wouldn't see light filtering down from above. Light would mean someone had moved the boards and bundles of magazines I'd used as camouflage. That would not be good. I thought I did see very faint light, but that was probably okay. The camouflage hadn't been perfect after all. Radar went up 4 or 5 steps, then looked back at me to see if I was coming. Nah, doggy. Me first. I don't want you in front of me when we get to the top. She obeyed, but very reluctantly. Dogs' noses are at least 40 times keener than those of humans. Maybe she could smell her old world up there, waiting. If so, it must have been an aggravating trip for her, because I had to keep stopping to rest. I was better, but not all better. Freed had told me to take it easy, and I was trying to follow the doctor's orders. When we made it to the top, I was relieved to see the final bundle of magazines, the one I'd balanced on my head like a load of wash, still in place. I stayed below it for at least a minute, probably more like 2 or 3, not just to rest this time. I had been eager to get home and still was, but now I was also scared, and a tiny bit homesick for what I'd left behind. In that world, there had been a palace and a beautiful princess and deeds of daring-do. Maybe somewhere, off the coast of Seafront perhaps, there were still mermaids, singing each to each. In the world below, I'd been a prince. In the one above, I'd have to write college applications and take out the trash. Radar bumped her muzzle into the back of my knee and gave 2 sharp barks. Who says dogs can't talk? Okay. I head-lifted the bundle, stepped up, and shoved it aside. I pushed away the bundles on either side, having to work slowly because my left arm wasn't up to much. It's better now, but will never be what it was in my football and baseball days. Thanks, Petra, you bitch. Radar gave a few more barks just to hurry me along. I had no problem slipping between the boards I'd laid over the well's mouth. I had lost a lot of weight during my time in Empus, most of it in deep Malene, but I had to wriggle out of the pack first and push it across the floor. By the time I got out, my left arm was singing. Radar popped out after me with disgusting ease. I checked the deep divot Petra's bite had left, afraid the healing wound might have broken open, but it looked okay. What surprised me was how cold it was in the shed. I could see my breath. The shed was just as I'd left it. The light I'd seen from below was filtering through the cracks in the sides. I tried the door and found it padlocked shut on the outside. Andy Chen had come through for me. I hadn't really believed anyone would check on the abandoned backyard shed for me, or my dead body, but it was still a relief. It meant, however, that I would have to use the sledgehammer, which I did, one-handed. Luckily, the boards were old and dry. One cracked on the first blow and broke out on the second, letting in a flood of Illinois daylight, and a fine swirl of snow. With Radar barking encouragement, I broke through 2 more. Raids leaped through the gap and immediately squatted to pee. I swung the sledge 1 more time and knocked out another long piece of board. I tossed my pack through, turned sideways, and stepped out into sunshine. Also into 4 inches of snow. 3. Radar bounded across the yard, pausing every now and then to bury her snout and fling snow into the air. It was puppy behavior and made me laugh. I was overheated from my climb up the spiral stairs and my work with the sledge, so by the time I got to the back porch, I was shivering. It couldn't have been more than 25 degrees. Add the strong breeze blowing, and the real temperature was probably half that. I got the spare key from its spot under the mat, which Mr. Bowditch had called the unwelcome mat, and let myself in. The place smelled musty, and it was chilly, but someone, almost certainly my dad, had turned the heat up a little to keep the pipes from freezing. I remembered seeing an old barn coat in the front closet, and it was still there. Also a pair of galoshes with red woolen socks flopping from the tops. The galoshes were tight on my feet, but I wouldn't be wearing them long, just down the hill. The gun belt and revolver went on the closet shelf. I'd put them back in the safe later, always assuming the safe with its secret stash was still there. We went out the back, around the house, and through the gate I'd had to climb over that first time in response to Radar's howls and Mr. Bowditch's weak cries for help. That now seemed like at least a century ago. I started to turn toward Sycamore Street Hill, but something caught my eye. In fact, I caught my eye. Because it was my face, on the phone pole at the intersection of Sycamore and Pine. My junior class photo, it so happened, and the first thing that struck me about it was how young I looked. There's a kiddie who didn't know nothing about nothing, I thought. Maybe he believed he did, but nah. In big red letters above the picture, "Have you seen this boy?" In bright red letters below them, Charles McGee Reed, age 17. And below that, Charles Charlie Reed, disappeared in October of 2013. He is 6'4" and weighs 235 pounds. He was last seen, etc. I got stuck on two things: how weather-beaten the poster looked, and how wrong it was about my current weight. I looked around, almost expecting to see Mrs. Richland staring at me with her hand shading her eyes, but it was just Radar and me standing on the salted sidewalk. Halfway to the house, I stopped, caught by a sudden impulse, wild but strong, to turn around, to go back through the gate at One Sycamore, around the house, into the shed, down the winding stairs, and finally into Empis, where I would learn a trade and make a life, apprentice myself to Freed, perhaps, who would teach me to be a sawbones. Then I thought of that poster, and all the others like it, everywhere in town and all over the county, put up by my father and my Uncle Bob and my dad's sponsor, Lindy. Maybe all his other AA friends, too. If that was, he hadn't resumed drinking. Please, God, no. I started walking again, the buckles of a dead man's galoshes jingling, and the dead man's rejuvenated dog at my heel. Trudging up the hill toward me was a little boy, in a quilted red jacket and snow pants. He was dragging a sled by a piece of clothes rope, probably bound for the sliding hill at Kavanaugh Park. "Hold up, Katie." He looked at me distrustfully, but stopped. "What day is it?" The words came out smoothly enough, but they seemed to have corners. I suppose that doesn't make any sense, but that's how they felt. And I knew why. I was speaking English again. He gave me a look that asked if I was born stupid or just grew that way. Saturday. So my father would be at home, unless he was at an AA meeting. What month? Now the look said, duh. February? 2014? Yeah. Gotta go. He went on his way to the top of the hill, sparing my dog and me one distrustful glance back over his shoulder, probably to make sure we weren't following with ill intent. February. I'd been gone 4 months. Strange to think about, but not as strange as the things I'd seen and done. 4. I stood in front of the house for a minute or so, steeling myself to go inside, hoping I wouldn't find my father passed out on the couch, with My Darling Clementine or Kiss of Death playing on TCM. The driveway had been plowed, and the walk was shoveled. I told myself that was a good sign. Radar got tired of waiting for me and ran up the steps, where she sat and waited to be let in. Once upon a time, I'd had a key to the door, but it had been lost somewhere along the way. Like Claudia's trike, I thought. Not to mention my virginity. Turned out it didn't matter. The door was unlocked. I let myself in, registered the sound of the TV, a news channel, not TCM, and then Radar was running down the hall, barking hello. When I entered the living room, she was on her back paws, the front ones planted on the newspaper my father had been reading. He looked at her, and then he looked at me. For a moment, he didn't seem to register who was standing in the doorway. When he did, shock loosened the muscles in his face. I'll never forget how that moment of recognition made him look both older, the man he would be in his 60s and 70s, and younger, like the kid he'd been at my age. It was as if some interior sundial turned both ways at once. "Charlie?" He started to stand up, but at first his legs wouldn't hold him, and he plumped back down again. Radar sat beside his chair, thumping her tail. "Charlie? Is it really you?" "It's me, Dad." This time he made it to his feet. He was crying. I started to cry, too. He ran for me, stumbled on an end table, and would have fallen if I hadn't caught him. Charlie, thank God, I thought you were dead. We all thought that you were—" He couldn't talk anymore. I had a lot to tell him, but right then I couldn't talk either. We embraced each other, over Radar, who got between us, wagging her tail and barking. "I think I know what you want. And now you have it. Here's your happy ending." Epilogue. Questions asked and answered. Some, at least. A final trip to Empis. 1. If you think that there are places in this story where it doesn't sound like a young man of 17 wrote them, you would be right. I returned from Empis 9 years ago. Since then, I've done a lot of reading and writing. I graduated from NYU cum laude, missed Summa by a hair, with a degree in English. I'm now teaching at the College of Liberal Arts in Chicago, where I hold a well-attended seminar called Myth and Fairy Tales. I am considered quite the bright spark, mostly because of an expanded version of an essay I wrote as a grad student. It was published in the International Journal of Jungian Studies. The pay was bupkis, but the critical cred, priceless. And you want to believe that I cited a certain book whose cover showed a funnel filling up with stars. Good to know, you might say, but I have questions. You're not the only one. I'd like to know how the reign of good Queen Leah is going. I'd like to know if the Grey folk are still grey. I'd like to know if Claudia of the Galleon is still blaring. I'd like to know if the way to that horrible underground world, the lair of Gog-Magog, has been blocked up. I'd like to know who took care of the remaining night soldiers, and if any of my fellow prisoners from Deep Malene were in at their finish. Probably not, but a man can dream. I'd even like to know how the night soldiers opened our cells the way they did, by just extending their arms. You'd like to know how Radar's doing, I suppose. The answer is very well, thanks, although she's slowed down a bit. After all, it's been 9 years for her, too, which makes her pretty dang old for a German Shepherd, especially if you add her old life and her new one together. You'd like to know if I told my father where I'd been for those 4 months. The answer, if I may borrow from the facial expression of a certain small sled-pulling kitty, is, duh. How could I not? Was I supposed to tell him that some miracle drug obtained in Chicago had changed Radar from an elderly arthritic dog at death's door into a hale and hearty German Shep who looked and acted about 4? I didn't tell him everything right away. There was far too much. But I was straight with him about the basics. There was a connection, I said, between our world and another. I didn't call it Empis, just the other, which was what I called it when I first came. I told him I'd gotten there from Mr. Bowditch's shed. He listened, carefully, then asked me, as you have surely guessed, where I'd really been. I showed him my arm, and the deep divot above my wrist that will remain there for the rest of my life. That didn't convince him. I opened my pack and showed him the gold door knocker. He examined it, hefted it, and suggested, tentatively, that it must be a gilt-coated yard sale item actually made of lead. Break it open and see for yourself. Might as well. It'll have to be melted down eventually and sold. There's a bucket of gold pellets in Mr. Bowditch's safe from the same place. I'll show you that when you're ready to look. It's what he was living on. I sold some myself to a jeweler in Stantonville, Mr. Heinrich. He's dead now, so eventually I guess I'll have to find someone else to do business with. That got him a little farther down the road to belief, but what finally convinced him was Radar. She knew her way around our house to all her favorite spots, but the real convincer was the stippling of small scars on her snout from an unfortunate encounter with a porcupine when she was young. Some dogs never learn about those, but once was enough for raids. My dad had noticed them when we were keeping her after Mr. Bowditch broke his leg and after he died, when she was on the verge of stepping out. The same scars remained on the younger version, probably because I'd hauled her off the sundial before she reached and passed the age when she got a nose full of quills. Dad looked at them for a long time, then looked at me with wide eyes. "This is impossible." "I know it seems that way," I said. "There's really a bucket of gold in Bowditch's safe?" "I'll show you," I repeated, "when you're ready. I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat cross-legged on the floor, petting Radar and thinking. After a while, he said, "This world you claim to have visited is magic? Like Xanth in those Piers Anthony books you used to read in junior high? Goblins and basilisks and centaurs and all that?" "Not quite like that," I said. I'd never seen a centaur in Empis, but if there were mermaids and giants... "Can I go there?" "I think you have to," I said, "at least once." Because Empis really wasn't much like Xanth. There was no Deep Maleen or Gog-Magog in the Piers Anthony books. We went, a week later. The prince, who was a prince no longer, and Mr. George Reed of Reed Insurance. I spent that week eating good old American food and sleeping in a good old American bed, and answering questions from good old American cops. Not to mention questions from Uncle Bob, Lindy Franklin, Andy Chen, various school administrators, and even Mrs. Richland, the neighborhood nosy Parker. By then, my father had seen the bucket of gold. I also showed him the baby light, which he examined with great interest. Do you want to know the story I womped up with the help of my dad, who just happened to be a crack insurance investigator, remember? A guy who knew a lot of the pitfalls liars fell into and thus how to avoid them? Probably you do, but let's just say that amnesia played a part, and add in how Mr. Bowditch's dog died in Chicago before I ran into trouble I can't remember, although I do seem to remember being conked on the head. The dog my dad and I have now is Radar 2. I bet Mr. Bowditch, who came back to Century as his own son, would have liked that one. Bill Harriman, the reporter from the Weekly Sun, asked me for an interview. He must have had an in with one of the cops. I declined. Publicity was the last thing I needed. Do you wonder what happened to Christopher Pauley? the nasty little Rumpelstiltskin who meant to kill me and steal Mr. Bowditch's treasure? I did, and a Google search turned up the answer. If you think back to the beginning of my story, you may remember me being afraid that my father and I would end up homeless, sleeping under an overpass with all our possessions piled in a shopping cart. That didn't happen to us, but it did to Polly, although I don't know about the shopping cart. The police found his body beneath a tri-state tollway overpass in Skokie. He had been stabbed repeatedly. Although he carried no wallet or identification, his fingerprints were on file, part of a long arrest record going back to his teens. The news article quoted Skokie Police Captain Brian Baker as saying the victim had been unable to defend himself because he had 2 broken wrists. I can tell myself that Polly might not have survived his assailant's attack in any case. There wasn't much to him, and I'd taken his gun. But I can't be sure. Nor can I be sure that the motive of the killing was the swag from the jewelry store robbery. Did he talk about it to the wrong person in an attempt to sell it and pay with his life? I don't know. Can't know. But in my heart, I'm sure. I'm less sure that he died at the same time Red Molly was batting Peterkin out of her way with enough power to tear that unpleasant dwarf in half. But I think that may have been the way of it. I can tell myself Polly brought it on himself, and that is true. But when I think of him raising his useless hands to ward off the knife strokes of whoever was kneeling over him in that trash-littered underpass, I can't help feeling sorry and ashamed. You may say I have no reason to feel shame, that I did what I had to do to save my life and the Shed's secret. But shame is like laughter and inspiration. It doesn't knock. 2. On the Saturday after I came home, a big snowstorm swept in from the Rockies. My father and I tramped up to Mr. Bowditch's house, me wearing boots that didn't cramp my feet, and went around to the back. Dad regarded the busted outside of the shed with disapproval. "That'll have to be repaired." I know, but it was the only way I could get out once Andy padlocked the door. There was no need of the baby light because we had 2 flashlights. We had left Radar at home. Once we came out of the tunnel, she would have made straight for the House of Shoes, and I didn't want to see Dora. I didn't want to see anyone from my time there. I just wanted to convince my dad the other world was real, and then get out. There was something else, too. Strange, and probably selfish. I didn't want to hear my father speaking Empyrean. That was mine. We went down the spiral stairs, me leading. My dad kept saying he couldn't believe it, just couldn't believe it. I hope to God I wasn't pushing him toward a mental breakdown, but given the stakes, I felt I had no choice. I still feel that way. In the tunnel, I told him to shine his light at the stone floor. Because there are bats. Big ones. I don't want them flying around us. Also, we're going to come to a place where you may feel dizzy, almost like an out-of-body experience. That's the crossover point. "Who made this?" he asked softly. "Jesus Christ, Charlie, who made this?" You might as well ask who made the world. Ours and others. I'm sure there are others, maybe as many as there are stars in the sky. We sense them. They funnel down to us in all the old stories. We came to the crossover, and he would have fallen, but I was ready and put my arm around his waist. "Maybe we should go back," he said. "I feel sick to my stomach." "Just a little further. There's light up ahead, see?" We came to the vines. I brushed them aside, and we stepped out into Empus, with a cloudless blue sky above us and Dora's house down the hill. There were no shoes hanging on her crisscrossing lines, but there was a horse grazing near King's Road. The distance was too great to be positive, but I'm pretty sure I knew that horse. And why not? The Queen no longer needed Falada to speak for her, and a city is no place for a horse. My father was looking around, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. Crickets, not red ones, jumped in the grass. "My God, they're so big." "You should see the rabbits," I said. "Sit down, Dad." "Before you fall down," I didn't add. We sat. I gave him some time to take it in. He asked how there could be sky under the ground. I said I didn't know. He asked why there were so many butterflies, all of them monarchs, and I told him again that I didn't know. He pointed at Dora's house. "Who lives down there?" "That's Dora's house. I don't know her last name." "Is she home? Can we see her?" "I didn't bring you here for a meet and greet, Dad. I brought you so you'd know it's real. And we're never coming here again. No one from our world can know about this one. It would be a disaster." "Judging by what we did to a good many indigenous peoples, not to mention our own climate, I'd have to agree with you." He was starting to take hold, and that was good. I'd been afraid of denial, or a terminal freakout. "What are you thinking about doing, Charlie?" "What Mr. Bowditch should have done years ago." "And why hadn't he?" "I think because of the sundial. The bad strain that lives in the hearts of every man and woman," Leah had said. "Come on, Dad. Let's go back." He stood up, but paused for another look when I held aside the vines. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is, now, and it's going to stay that way." We would protect Empis from our world, and also protect our world, at least try, from Empis. Because below Empis is a world of darkness, where Gog-Magog still lives and rules. It might never escape, now that Bella and Arabella have shared a final shattering kiss, but when it comes to such unknowable creatures, it's best to be careful. As careful as one can be, at least. That spring my dad and I repaired the hole I'd made in the side of the shed. That summer I worked for Kramer Construction, mostly in the office because of my arm, but I spent a fair number of hard-hat hours as well, learning all I could about concrete. A lot of stuff was on good old YouTube, but when you've got an important job to do, there's nothing like practical experience. 2 weeks before I left for my first semester at NYU, Dad and I placed pieces of sheet steel over the mouth of the well. 1 week before I left, we poured concrete over them and the entire floor of the shed. While it was still wet, I encouraged Radar to put her paw prints in it. I'm going to tell you the truth. Sealing that well under steel and 7 inches of concrete hurt my heart. Somewhere down below is a world full of magic and people I loved. One person in particular. As the concrete flowed sluggishly out of the mixer I'd borrowed from Kramer to do the job, I kept thinking of Leah, standing on the stairs, sword drawn, legs braced in a fighting stance, and of how she had cut open her sealed mouth to cry out her brother's name. I lied just now, okay? My heart didn't just hurt. It cried out. No, and no, and no. It asked how I could leave wonder behind and turn my back on magic. It asked if I really meant to plug the funnel the stars fall through. I did it because I had to. Dad understood that. 3. Do I dream, you ask? Of course. Some of them are of the thing that came out of the well, and I wake from those with my hands over my mouth to stifle my screams. But as the years pass, those nightmares come less. More often these days I dream of a field blanketed in poppies. I dream of red hope. We did the right thing. I know that. The only thing. And still my dad keeps an eye on the house at 1 Sycamore Street. I come back often and do the same, and eventually I will come back to Century for good. I may marry, and if I have children, the house on the hill will go to them. And when they are small, and wonder is all they know, I will read them the old stories, the ones that start once upon a time. November 25th, 2020, through February 7th, 2022.
Fairy Tale, a novel, was written by Stephen King and read by Seth Numrick with Stephen King. It was recorded by Stephen Toll and Don Hoffman at CityVox Studios in New York City. Editing and post-production by Rick Bradley, Frog Pond Productions. Credits edited and mixed by Terry Hogan. The associate producer was Claire Tadakoro. Fairy Tale was produced and directed by Christina Zarafanidis. Special thanks to Jonathan Leonard. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. Fairy Tale is available in print from Scribner. Also by Stephen King from Simon & Schuster Audio. Billy Summers, read by Paul Sparks. If It Bleeds, read by Will Patton, Danny Burstein, and Stephen Weber. And The Institute, read by Santino Fontana.